Who was the best puncher of 2022? Really difficult one because there wasn't a dominant figure like an Alaphilippe who sweeps Liège and Flèche, or wins Flèche and is second at Liège and then wins Worlds, punching away from everybody. Wout van Aert, I think some incredible puncher performances, including the Tour de France, in the Calais stage. I mean, dropping the entirety of the Tour de France on that stage was pretty impressive, but was that positioning from the team? Yeah, how important is that? Kind of important. Alaphilippe had a down year. Cosnefroy was kind of anonymous for a lot of... it's not true. He lost Amstel in a photo. And then won Quebec. And then, Amstel he might have won. Yeah, Kwiatkowski won that, but didn't do anything else. Turns did well in spring, and then we didn't see him afterwards. And he went to Israel after winning Flèche and was the strongest probably in the last climb in Liège. And then Remco's a hard one. Pogacar wins on the sprint rather than punching. That's why it's tricky, Benji.
This video is brought to you by Zwift. Whether you're just starting out on your cycling journey or are looking for those final tune-ups ahead of a big event or race, Zwift is the online cycling platform that makes things fun. There are 9 different worlds, thousands of kilometers of virtual road, including replicas of real-world climbs like Alpe du Zwift. There's workouts, training plans, events, and even races for every level of rider. Zwift's massive community means you're never alone on the road. So if you want to know more about Zwift or want to start your 7-day trial for free, head to Zwift.com below.
Well, who have you got outside your top 3?
Before I go there, I'd like to talk about Alaphilippe a bit, because he was the reigning champion of the punchers back in the day, as in only last year still, with his wins at the Tour de France on stage 1 last year and so forth. This year, I'd argue that he was dealt a bad card when it comes to injuries throughout the entire year. You got to think about Strade Bianche, early on, crashes, not competitive for that race anymore. Then we look at the likes of Tirreno, that's where he straight up isn't at the level necessary to do well on that Belante stage, for example. Then we move towards the races that actually matter for him, and we talk about LBL, for example, crashes out in a descent. Then we look at later in the year, the Tour de France. He is not there because he had that crash in LBL, so we can't prove it in the Tour de France either. Then he rides the Vuelta, not in top form, crashes out again, preparation for the World Championships kind of ruined. So Alaphilippe is not washed in my eyes at all. Next year, he's going to be back if he doesn't have these issues and can be the best puncher of 2023 again. I truly believe that. Yes, he's getting older, but I wouldn't write him off at all at the moment, Julien Alaphilippe. That being said, I do think he should probably leave Quickstep after this contract and rack in money, while Evenepoel is probably going to take the lead in Tour de France races from 2024 onwards at Quickstep. But that discussion aside, Alaphilippe's not gone for me, but he's not in the top 3 here because simply he wasn't able to prove it because of injuries, recurring injuries, and wasn't necessarily in the form in races that weren't big goals to take a 3rd spot in this. Then you mentioned the Cosnefroy. He's one of the riders that is fighting for that 3rd spot for me, together with the likes of a Dylan Teuns. And I'm mentioning these pure punchers, Cosnefroy and Teuns, because these are not GC riders that can also do these punchy things. A Pogacar and an Evenepoel are those 2 riders. And when we look at Tadej Pogacar, winning Montreal, Lombardia, Strade Bianche, the Belante stage at Tirreno, those are punchy type races. He did also win a few of those with punchy skills, as in punching on the hills or punching in the final sprint. That final kick was very strong this year for Pogacar. He arguably has a sprint, a proper sprint. When it comes to Remco Evenepoel, wins Liège-Bastogne-Liège and the World Championships, and San Sebastian. San Sebastian being more climby than punchy in my personal opinion, but when it comes to LBL and World Championships, punches away at the top of La Redoute, the climb where he ends up going away and keeps that lead towards the line. That's not the usual puncher strategy. A puncher strategy is usually that you're able to punch hard on the climb and you beat them on the climb. He beats them on like the top part where it starts going into the flat mode that he can start time trialing on. So it's weird, huh? Because Evenepoel does great at these puncher races, but doesn't necessarily have the kick of a puncher. Or do you disagree with that?
I think he did show that he had that this year. He didn't do Flèche, I don't think.
He did, but he was not used properly by Quickstep. And they went for Alaphilippe at the end, if I recall correctly.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that was pointless. Yeah. I mean, Alaphilippe still came fourth, but I think it's Evenepoel. He's my number one because the other contender for number one, I think, Pogacar, when did he win a race with an uphill punch either? Like, are you going to count Super Planche de Belfi or Périgord? I guess you can. His punch at the end of long climbs was good, but in terms of being an overall puncher, his win in Lombardia was like on the Civiglio, being able to stay with Mas, win the sprint. His win on Montreal, stay with Adam Yates, win the sprint. So you can't give it to Pogacar and then say, well, Evenepoel didn't win by winning on an uphill punch when he's winning Puncheur races. And I do think his punch was quite good. Like, in Tour of Norway, he beat, I know it's Norway, but he beat Johannesson, who's pretty fast. He
Was in
beat
a
Ethan
terrible
Hayter. Pardon?
Jonathan was in a terrible position that day, though. We gotta mention that small detail.
Well, Evenepoel took a piss with 12 Ks to go and came back. Hayter was there, so he made his own position. You make your own luck. So, and it suits my narrative. So I'm going. There was the Belante stage, Pog. Yeah, that one's pretty good for Pog in Tirreno. I'm still going with Evenepoel. You can't win Liège world champs on that sort of course, and a few other things here and there, like Norway, etc. On punchy finishes and not get it, particularly when Pogacar, Strade, downhill sort of sprint, and the others were flat sprints too. I'm just giving it to Evenepoel because the races were bigger, but it's close. I think third, I'm giving to Dylan Turns. I'm going to go with a pure puncher for that, winner of Flesh. I think on Rochefoucauld, or whatever the last climb was, in Liège, he was dropping people, and with a different team, maybe he could have won that race. And so, he's my third pick. Honourable mentions are Cosnefroy and Valverde, who was consistent, but at no point was Valverde ever really gapping people on anything this year. So he was just top, second to sixth in a lot of these big races.
Firmly agree. I agree with your top three, but I don't have the same one. I believe that I understand every single one of your arguments. I see how you would put an Remco Evenepoel above a Pogacar, for example, but I didn't do it. I've got Pogacar in first and Evenepoel in second, and the reason I do so is because I still believe that extra kick that Pogacar has is valuable for me when it comes to the puncher discussion, and that puts him a bit above Evenepoel, despite me agreeing with you that LBL and World Championships are more important than the combination of Montreal, Lombardia, Strade, and the Belanta stage at Tirreno, for example. So I think it's just really close, those two, and I find it really hard to put them against each other in this discussion, but I'm going to go for Pogacar above Evenepoel because I believe he's the fastest man on an uphill sprint, basically, if a Van der Poel and a Wout van Aert have already spent a bit of their bickies throughout the parkour as well. And even then, a Pogacar can still beat them on an uphill sprint this year. Like, the only situation where that narrative doesn't make sense, and I'll say it despite not including it in my narrative because it doesn't fit my narrative, is that Tour de France stage where Wout van Aert beat Pogacar on the uphill in the last sprint in the stage that...
to Lausanne, stage 8, and Blink came second. I get, like, Pog's record is undeniable. It's really a definitional thing. Like, Belante is clearly punch. What about Jebel Jais? It's a long climb, but it's a group of 20. It's kind of still punch, like, to win that stage. Tour of Flanders, he was the strongest on the uphill. Does he get credit for that? Probably, yeah. So physically, in terms of actual uphill punch, like Pog, I would take over Evenepoel. In a succession of punchy climbs, who do I think might come out best in a race? I think we saw in World Champs, and I don't know if Pog did Liège. Can't remember. I think he pulled out. Evenepoel then takes more of an edge, and it's not like he's a scrub uphill anymore either, Evenepoel. He is quite punchy. So it's close, and turns third, I guess, is just an honourable. If you win Flesh, you have to go in the top 3.